and the underlying profitability of the business is continuing to be restored.
Suncorp shares currently trading weaker by around $1.90. More than 200 government and business leaders will today come together to discuss the nation's infrastructure sector, which has been under intense pressure during these financially challenging times. This year alone, we've seen major road projects like Sydney's Cross City Tunnel and Lane Cove Tunnel struggle to break even as motorists avoid using the tollways. So how can government and the private sector work more effectively to make an infrastructure project profitable and encourage the community to use the facility? We spoke to the chairman of Infrastructure Partnerships Australia, Mark B, and began by asking what he hopes to achieve from today's conference.
It's a critical time for us to get the planning right for the next suite of infrastructure projects. Across the country, there's a lot of demand by both the business sector to improve export-based infrastructure, but also demand by ordinary people who are saying, let's improve the urban amenity, let's particularly improve our capital cities.
The public have got an expectation that these projects are going to work successfully. By contrast, how ambitious are you being to believe that they can actually deliver a profit for the business sector?
I think we have to be very ambitious, and sometimes that means that there's a lot of debate, particularly when you have to plan projects well and get environmental approvals. But if we're not ambitious, we're not going to improve quality of life, we're not going to improve the economy at a time when it really needs assistance. Because infrastructure can provide that next step that individuals need and businesses, but if you put it off, then you lose a lot of advantage. So being ambitious is good, although it is tough to do it. We've got to get the skills to do it, and there's a break on that. We've got to get the finance, and importantly, you've got to take people with you so they can see the outcome and how it's going to benefit them.
You talk about the skills shortage. How are we going to stem that trend of people going over to the likes of Dubai and India, where wages are significantly more lucrative for those expat workers? What is the incentive for getting these people to stay here to work on the projects?
It's probably the single greatest challenge of getting the skills to both design, construct and then to maintain large-scale infrastructure. So many Australians with the skills in this area are working overseas in the Gulf states, in Asia, in India, doing large construction projects. We're world leaders in that. We need more people here who can help deliver this infrastructure, and companies are spending the large portion of their time hiring, training, and we're going to have to do even more of that over the next 12 months so we can get these projects moving.
Let's examine funding and the current environment to get these projects off the ground. What sort of lateral way of examining financing can we be looking at in this environment?
It is all about partnerships. You've got governments, federal, state, working with the private sector, working with new sources of funds like superannuation funds who are looking to long-term investments, and it's often a perfect match with a major infrastructure project that has returns over 25, 40, 50 years, bringing them together and saying, okay, how can we get this project up? It's needed, the cost benefit, trying to marshal the resources. Recently, the federal government became a major new player in infrastructure, traditionally been left largely to the states. The federal government has put money into the Building Australia Fund, which we welcome, which is available from the 1st of January for large-scale projects. That will be an important injection. But as I said, one of the great new sources will be superannuation funds. Individuals who put their money into super want a good return on it. This is a very good way of getting it into an infrastructure project that meets local needs.
And yet, how are you going to be able to deliver for super funds and other key investors when there have been so many high-profile disasters?
Projects have to have a very good and clear business plan, a very good and clear set of objectives. Investors deserve no less than that. There's been controversy over the Cross City Tunnel, and frankly, it was deserved. There were some mistakes made in its procurement. A lot of lessons have been learnt from it, which are very welcome. The overwhelming majority of the infrastructure projects across the nation have been successful ones, delivering to individuals in terms of commuters, for example, or delivering to businesses in terms of port upgrades, which are vitally necessary for exports. You'll get publicity. Infrastructure is big and visible. I think it's natural you're going to get that type of scrutiny. And in fact, it's desirable to ensure that the next suite of projects are really well timed and well argued.
You've talked about there the importance of getting the government on board with this. How equally, are you going to get the public over the line in being convinced that these projects are in their interest to support?
Hopefully, this year we'll see a degree of cooperation that we haven't seen across state boundaries. We need to do that if we're going to have, for example, the national energy market and infrastructure that we need, the national water market that we need to get better water supply, both urban and rural. You can't deal with things in terms of the old battles or the old geographic boundaries of the states. I think the prospects are good. I'm optimistic about cooperation across state boundaries. I think everyone's sort of looked on the last 5 or 6 years of bickering and realised it was completely unproductive. There's a lot of sharing of skills now across boundaries about procuring new projects. Areas like social infrastructure, virtually every state is building a 500-bed super specialist public hospital, and they're sharing knowledge about doing that and when they can procure it to get the best advantage for their users. What we want to do is ensure that we get an absolute dialogue, a very professional dialogue, and a matching of some of the funds that everyone can bring together so that we can get this infrastructure up.
And of course there's carbon trading, a new additional cost arguably for business to put into the mix. How much more burden financially is that going to place on these projects?
Certainly the uncertainty about where the future is in that area is going to impact decisions this year on investment in new energy sources. We welcome the fact that there's a pretty active dialogue now which business is very heavily involved in ensuring that it gets the settings right. But the expansion of the capacity, particularly in Sydney, for new energy production is absolutely vital. Otherwise you'll have shortages which have dramatic ramifications.
Sure, but notably we have an opposition out there who's going to be conspicuous by their absence and not even coming to the conference. So what does that message send about getting some kind of big tent consensus around the need for infrastructure reform?
One of the issues in front of getting a national energy market, of course, is privatisation in New South Wales. And we welcome the fact that the New South Wales government, even though it's sometimes a hot debate, is moving on that so that we can have a proper energy market. That will be a very good sign for Australia working across boundaries. I don't think Australians care where their electricity is produced. If it's produced in Sydney and sold into Melbourne or vice versa, what they want is a market so that they've got certainty of supply.
We have got plenty more to come after the break, including a record result for the world's biggest oil producer. Plus, we'll take a look at what's moving that oil price.